All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a book written way back in 1895 that honestly feels like it could have been written this morning. It's Gustave Le Bon's hugely influential and controversial work, The Crowd, a study of the popular mind. And its ideas about how we act in groups, well, they're more relevant now than ever.
So here's the central mystery that Le Bon's work really tries to unravel. It's a question we've probably all asked ourselves at some point. How can a bunch of seemingly normal, rational people come together and suddenly transform into a single, impulsive, and sometimes really dangerous mob? What flips that switch?
Okay, so Le Bon's first big idea is this. A crowd isn't just a bunch of people standing near each other. He argues that the very moment individuals form a group, something totally new is created. It's a collective being that has, you could say, a mind of its own.
What Le Bon is saying here is that the simple act of gathering causes a massive psychological shift. It's not just a collection of individuals anymore. A whole new entity emerges from that assembly. And this new being feels and acts in ways that none of its individual members would ever do on their own. So, how on earth does that happen? Well, according to Le Bon's theory, the conscious personality of every single person in the crowd just gets submerged. It fades away, swallowed up by this new, powerful collective mind.
And this gets us to his big concept, the psychological crowd. He sees it as this temporary being that's fused together from different people. His analogy for it is perfect, really. Think of it like this. You've got all these individual living cells, right? But when they combine, they form a body. And that body has abilities and characteristics that none of those single cells possessed on their own.
And you can see the transformation right here. It's like night and day. On one hand, you have the isolated individual. They're irrational, they have self-control, but the moment they join a crowd, their conscious personality is gone. They start acting on pure instinct. And that little voice in your head that says, hey, maybe don't do that, it just vanishes.
So Le Bon breaks down how this happens into three main causes. First step, anonymity. When you're in a crowd, you feel powerful, invisible, and that feeling of personal responsibility just dissolves. Then you've got contagion. This is where ideas and feelings spread like a virus, almost hypnotically. And finally, suggestibility. The individual enters this state where they're like a hypnotized person. Their own willpower is gone, and they're ready to follow any suggestion.
Le Bon really doesn't pull any punches with this. He's basically saying that just by joining an organized crowd, a person takes a nosedive down the ladder of civilization. A thoughtful, cultured person becomes, in his words, a barbarian, someone acting on the same raw, primal instincts as our most ancient ancestors. All right, so what does this new collective mind actually act like? What's its personality? Well, Le Bon paints a pretty specific and, let's be honest, a pretty unflattering picture.
According to Le Bon, a crowd is impulsive. It's irritable. It can't really reason or judge things clearly. It's super gullible, ridiculously so. And its emotions are always black and white. A tiny little suspicion? Nope, that becomes absolute certainty. A small annoyance? That blows up into raging hatred. It doesn't do nuance. It's fundamentally intolerant and demands everyone submit to its will. And to show you just how suggestible a crowd can be, Le Bon tells this incredible true story. A whole naval crew was searching for a lost ship, and they became absolutely convinced they saw a raft full of shipwrecked survivors. They could hear voices, they could see people waving frantically. But when they got close enough to see, what was it? Just a bunch of tree branches with leaves floating in the water. That's it. A collective hallucination sparked by just a tiny suggestion. But, and this is really important, Le Bon isn't saying that crowds are always evil. They're a double-edged sword. A crowd can be led to do the absolute worst things imaginable, but it can also be inspired to be incredibly heroic and selfless. So whether a crowd is a monster or a hero, it all comes down to what idea gets planted in its head. Okay, so that leads to the million-dollar question, right? If these crowds are so powerful and so easily influenced, how do you lead them? Le Bon's answer is clear. You don't use logic. You can't reason with the crowd. You have to learn how to speak to its soul.
Yeah, for Le Bon, the leader is absolutely central. He says a crowd is like a flock of sheep. It just can't function without a shepherd. And these leaders, they aren't deep thinkers or philosophers. They're people of action. And what's fascinating is that they're often completely captivated, almost hypnotized by the very ideas they're pushing. So, a leader has this toolkit, right? 3 main ways to persuade a crowd. First, affirmation. You just state things simply and boldly, no need for evidence. Then, repetition. You say it again and again and again until it just sinks in and becomes accepted as a fact. And finally, contagion. You get the idea to spread like a virus until it creates its own unstoppable momentum.
So when you put it all together, what does it mean? It means that real power over crowds comes from capturing their imagination. You don't win them over with spreadsheets and logic. You win them over by painting powerful pictures in their minds. A glorious victory, a shocking injustice, a beacon of hope. That's the stuff that moves crowds, and that's how you govern them.
But there's one tool that trumps them all. The most powerful weapon in the arsenal. Le Bon calls it prestige. He describes it as this almost magical kind of power. It just mesmerizes you. It shuts down your critical thinking completely and fills you with this sense of awe and respect. It's the ultimate source of a leader's power.
And if you want a perfect example of what this prestige looks like in real life, listen to this. One of Napoleon's toughest generals, a guy who says he fears nothing, not God, not the devil, admits that when he's near Napoleon, he trembles like a child. He said Napoleon could make him go through the eye of a needle to throw myself into the fire. Now that is prestige.
Okay, so let's recap. We've talked about what a crowd is, what it's capable of, and how it's led. But Le Bon wraps up his book with a pretty chilling prediction, because he saw his own time, the late 1800s, as this huge, dangerous turning point for humanity.
Remember, he's writing this way back in 1895. He looks around and sees all the old sources of authority. Kings, religion, they're all starting to crumble. And he says, I know what's coming next. A new power is rising up to take their place, the power of the crowd.
Basically, he predicted that the divine right of kings was over, and the divine right of the masses was about to begin. The fate of nations wasn't going to be decided in quiet rooms by rulers anymore. Nope. It was going to be decided in the heart, in the gut of the masses. And the voice of the people, with all its passion and its biases, was about to become the most powerful force on earth.
And that brings us right back to our world today. When you look at everything happening, the way social media mobs can form in an instant, how ideas and trends go viral, the incredible power of public opinion that's amplified by all our technology, you just have to ask yourself, was Le Bon right? Are we living in the era of crowds that he saw coming more than 100 years ago?